the Bell. Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostick alongside Katie Greifeld. We're counting you down to that closing bell. Here to help take us beyond the bell. It's a global simulcast with our best friends, Massar and Madison Mills. Welcome to our audiences across Bloomberg Television, Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Originals, and those folks still streaming on YouTube. The Dow up 1% on the day, Carol.
Yep.
The S&P slightly up. The NASDAQ, though, as well as the Russell 2000 remain on the back foot.
But NASDAQ well off its worst levels of the session, really trying to get there in these last few minutes of trading. Having said that, just looking at the S&P 500, we know one of the big stories, market stories today, is what's happening in the oil markets because of that surprise cut by OPEC. If I look at the S&P 500, top 10 names in it, no surprise, they're all energy, Marathon Oil at the top there, Maddie.
And then the big question I have, if oil does hit $100 a barrel, what does that do to the Fed? Jay Powell's sloughing this off. Bullard also saying maybe there's a little bit of concern there, but it seems like from what the Fed's done previously, Katie, they're not too concerned about the energy space.
Well, a point I just made to Romaine, too, is that at least in the equity market, this huge rally that we're seeing in these energy shares, it's coming on pretty light volume. You look at the S&P 500 right now, trading volume down about 15% or so versus its 20-day average.
It's been light for a while, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, remember, we had a down open here. I mean, we opened in the red here for the major indices, and of course, we did see the S&P punch into the green, and it looks like it could potentially close there. But you look at sort of what's being bought. It's not just energy, but it's healthcare. There's a lot of defensive stocks out there that I think people are gravitating right now, and maybe that's a reflection also of what we're seeing in the Treasury market as we continue to see people pile back into Treasuries, both on the short and the longer end of the curve. We do get the closing bells in New York, about 300 points higher on the Dow Jones Industrial Average as we wait for these numbers to settle. Either way, that's going to be good for about a 1% gain on the day. The S&P 500 up by about 15 points, or about 0.4%. The NASDAQ Composite lower on the day by about 30 points, or 0.3%. And the Russell 2000, which had been flirting with going into the green, looks like it's just going to miss that, closing basically unchanged on the day, down only about a point or so.
Yeah, and you know what I want to say is Claudia Sahm of Sahm Consulting was on with us, and she's got her indicator that talks about a recession. She doesn't see any sign of recession, or at least the indicator is not indicating it at this point. And she said, reminding us we've got a very, very strong labor market, and this week is a lot about the labor market, Katie.
Well, before we get to that Friday jobs report, let's look at the industry groups because it's telling a very interesting story. Of course, you have energy up at the top there, up almost 5%. We all know why. OPEC plus surprise production cut. You can see that surprise in some of those shares. Healthcare equipment, telecom, also some of your big gainers today, again, speaks to that defensive tilt underneath the surface of this rally. And then you go down to the bottom, it's real estate, and Carol, it's autos. We know that those Tesla delivery numbers didn't quite live up to the street's expectations necessarily.
All right, so let's get to some of the individual gainers on this money. Cano Health up 47% here, pretty much holding on to its gains of the session, jumping after former board members Barry Sternlicht, Elliot Cooperstone, and Louis Gold formed a group, and they are agreeing to act together to pursue changes at the company that includes potentially a replacement of the CEO, sale of non-core assets, and enhancement of shareholder value. So that aggregate voting power of the group, approximately 35.7% according to Sternlicht's amended 13D filing. So we're keeping a watch on that. I love this. A case of mistaken identity continues. Republic First Bancorp, ticker FRBK, up another 17%. It had been down about 40% at its lows this month because investors continue to confuse it with First Republic Bank. So you have First Republic and you have Republic First Bancorp, which is what I'm talking about. It's now up 2 days in a row, big rally. It was up 14% on Friday, up another 17% today. So again, just this mistaken identity of getting confused with the embattled First Republic. Just want to mention casino names. Las Vegas Sands up about 2.2% in today's session, off its highs. But those that operate in Macau getting a boost today. Some data showing that the city's gaming revenue soared 247% in March, buoyed by a return of tourists from mainland China as those COVID restrictions eased. So we saw Las Vegas Sands, Wynn Resorts, Melco, a bunch of names there on the move today, Maddie.
Well, and bringing us our decliners here, we've got to start with Tesla, just dragging down the NASDAQ, closing at a little bit over 6%. This is the street's disappointment over Tesla's latest update on deliveries in the first quarter. Musk's vehicle delivery goals beating estimates, but not as much as his goal of 50% annual growth. The numbers were broadly in line with analyst expectations, but many said that investors had likely expected a little bit more here, given that stock price run up leading into the report today. The big question, though, will demand be able to keep up with production at Tesla? And we're hearing a similar story from Rivian, down by about 1.6%. Shares falling as much as 5.5% today after just a small beat on those first quarter delivery numbers, boosting the stock. And our sources tell us that they continue to see Rivian's ability to ramp production levels as a key factor in meeting or exceeding those 2023 estimates there, and that Rivian's order backlog is going to be critical as well, because that might be sufficient to offset any recessionary headwinds. And then Katie Greifeld, I know this is your favorite story today. WWE down by a little over 2% on that big news with Endeavor striking a deal to buy the company.
The big news, of course, coming in today after Sunday was the OPEC plus production cuts. That actually should put a bid under treasuries right now, and we actually saw yields spike higher. But then, of course, well, a few hours later on Monday morning, we got that factory data, the ISM data, which showed continued softness in the manufacturing sector, and that reversed the situation. We saw yields drop all across the board, down about 6 basis points on your 2-year yield and the 10-year yield, and about 3 basis points on your 20-year yield, too, if you go out to 30 here. And it raises a lot of questions right now about economic conditions, particularly in light of the fact that we know that the Fed's fight isn't done. We know that there's still a lot of economic data, and we're headed into, well, a new earnings season that could be a little bit different, a much different complexion than what we saw for the fourth quarter earnings season.
Yeah, the bond market, I mean, it's been a puzzle throughout all of this, really since early March. I know that we aren't seeing the type of volatility that we were enjoying a few weeks ago. We're past those 25 basis point daily swings, but still, you're left with a 2-year yield at 4%, the 10-year at 3.40. That seems very low relative to some of those fundamentals that Romaine just mentioned. The fact that inflation is still a problem, and the Fed has stayed committed to that messaging that they're not done yet.
Well, and this is why, I mean, I agree that one of the next big focal points has got to be the earnings and what we get in terms of commentary about outlook and the concerns of companies. Are they spending on equipment? Are they hiring? I mean, certainly a lot of the headlines would say even though a lot of them have been concentrated in the tech sector, you know, we have the McDonald's story today. Like, there's a lot of things going on. So what does the commentary from the C-suite, what kind of picture does it ultimately paint to give us an idea of maybe what the Fed can do or has to do going forward?
Well, and also what's happening with labor, Carol, as we head into Friday's jobs report. The Fed is very likely hoping for some good news for them on that, showing a little bit more weakness in the labor market to indicate that the fight against inflation is kind of creating some of that softness they're looking for.
Also interesting, too, I mean, I have a focus on geopolitics, and we don't want to get too deep into it because we know that sometimes what happens in politics doesn't necessarily affect the markets, but you've got a lot of activity involving China and Taiwan. The Taiwanese president's supposed to be in the U.S., the French president's supposed to be in China, and then, of course, there's all of the, I guess, circus right now surrounding former President Donald Trump landing in New York for what is expected to be an indictment and an arraignment tomorrow. And, of course, you know, a man that we should point out is running for president for a third time here, so it certainly matters and could certainly alter the trajectory, at least of the primary, the Republican primary here in the United States.
Pretty quick trip for Donald Trump. He's supposed to go back to Florida.
Well, you know he's got his own plane, right?
That helps, definitely.
It does. It's nice. It's a big plane.
It is interesting to,
there is no more beautiful
I've never
plane
seen the plane, but
it's the most beautifulest thing in the world.
Beautifulest thing in the world. I'm going to write that down.
Is this an SNL skit?
Whatever happened to Keith Murray? Is he still around?
I don't know who that is.
Okay, I didn't expect you to.
No,
but in any case,
don't you feel like the OPEC?
I just entertain.
What happened? I'm not going to even listen.
Myself.
What happened with OPEC? It's just a reminder. A year ago, right? The war in Ukraine. These are things that just kind of come at us from, it feels like, nowhere, and it's just a reminder that it just sometimes throws another hook, if you will, into how the Fed needs to think about policy potentially. We know they're on that inflation fight. They say it.
But it gets to the idea of what we're talking about, I think, on the last one we joined you about an hour ago. Yeah. And to Powell's credit, he talks about this idea of just focusing on what the Fed can control, or at least what they think they can control.
Right, but as we've talked about, the Fed can't control oil prices, and Riyadh is going to do what they're going to do to protect their own bag here,
I'm confused.
right?
So didn't Biden go over there and fist bump MVS and all that? And what do we get out of that?
Not a lot.
Oh.
I mean,
It's a very complex.
And is it just about shoring up the price? They're worried about the global economic outlook, so they're, doing this preemptory cut to shore up
OPEC
prices.
Plus? No, I think they're worried about their own economies.
Well, that's what I'm saying, right? So doing that to take advantage of it. So,
Especially after the Credit Suisse situation really impacting Saudi as well.
you know what we get tomorrow?
No.
Job openings. I'm curious about the job market.
I thought you were going to say more simulcasts, and I was excited.
You lost me.
All right, guys, that is a wrap. Our Monday simulcast, our cross-platform coverage, radio, TV, Bloomberg Originals, and of course on YouTube. We call it Beyond the Bell. We will see you again, same time, same place tomorrow.